Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a breaking news piece that is only tangentially connected to the Ukraine war that I usually talk about. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of the UK, has, in a surprise move, called a general election. Now, there were thoughts it was going to be later in this year, really maybe being kicked into the long weeds a little bit more. It all depends on how things are going, what the outlook is for the Conservative Party in terms of polling, in terms of other data that's coming through. And since inflation has looked somewhat more beneficial just now, I think the recent stats that have come out has inflation doing better than was expected. He's called, possibly as a result of that, called a general election for July. And that doesn't give us very much time. It's now coming up to the end of May, so just a sort of 1.5 months or more, a couple of months really, before this election will take place. We knew something was going to be announced today. David Cameron had cancelled a trip to Albania. Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, had cancelled a foreign trip, so we knew it was coming. Labour are massively ahead in the polls, hugely so, to a very consistent level as well. This has been a fairly chronic advantage that they have had over most of this year. The whole election doesn't look like it's going to be easy riding for the Conservative Party. The one hope they have, or the one hope they might have, not of retaining power. I don't think the Conservatives can realistically retain power, but they might hope to scare people that there'll be a coalition because Labour might not win an outright majority, and that could be over something like the Israel-Gaza conflict that may hurt Labour on the left. They might get people who go to the Green Party. As we saw in the local elections recently, we had a situation whereby a number of Muslim communities or voters in Muslim communities in certain areas of the country either went to George Galloway's party or the Green Party, and that did hurt Labour. There's also the Lib Dems that are going to be eating away at Labour's vote. But the thing that the Conservatives have to worry about themselves is the Reform Party, Richard Tice's Reform Party, that is kind of a new iteration of UKIP, but is taking primarily from the Conservative electorate, whereas UKIP took the working class Labour votes to some degree for the Brexit election, as well as some Conservative voters as well. So where that was a bipartisan problem, the Reform Party appears to be a problem only really for the Conservative Party. A lot of the Brexit voters that went to UKIP who were Labour voters have gone back to Labour. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. It's going to be perhaps a case of damage limitation, which is why he's called it now rather than later. But yeah, not unexpected, but it is breaking news. I am somewhat surprised it is July and not, as was expected, sort of November time. But it has been 14 years of Conservative government. Lots of people are saying that they would like a change. Keir Starmer's not really been, he doesn't have the messaging behind him in terms of the mechanisms of messaging, because the media space in the UK very much favours the right. So if you look at the readership and the number of right-leaning newspapers in the UK, it's astonishingly asymmetrical. So you have a vast readership of the Daily Mail. You also have the Daily Express, Daily Telegraph, and the Sun, big tabloid paper, the Sun. You have the Evening Standard. You've got the Spectator. You've got the Financial Times. You've got the Times. Right, all of those are right-leaning. And then you have the Guardian here, which is left-leaning but has a very small readership. It's got a pretty good online footprint, and a lot of younger people get their news online these days, and certain demographics favour that. But in terms of print, very small readership. And the Mirror is a tabloid which has a much lower readership than, say, the Sun. And so therefore the mechanisms of messaging favour the right. You've got TV news generally is traditionally been centrist, Sky News and BBC, although people get confused about that. They think BBC is really left-leaning, but politically it's quite centrist. It favours the left kind of socially as a reflection of society in the social moral dimension, but not so much in the actual political realm. And then you've got GB News and Talk TV that have come along that are right leaning. So there really is nothing that supports the left in terms of your mainstream media. You've got online sources like Novara Media that do a really good job, but that really speak to the further to the left, but nothing in the mainstream media space. So the challenges Labour have are with campaigning and trying to get the message out there when the media don't particularly favour them. However, after 14 years of Conservative rule, where the Conservatives aren't very popular, you'll get possibly some of those media sources hedging their bets a little, reading the tea leaves and going, well, we don't want to be on a losing side, so maybe they'll pile in on Rishi Sunak and kind of not be so overtly pro-conservative. So that it'd be interesting to see, for example, where the Sun goes, because importantly, Sun is a Rupert Murdoch newspaper, and in 1997 they sided with Tony Blair and the Labour Party then, and that you could argue was part of that New Labour wave, that landslide victory. So there have been some MRP polling, which is polling of constituencies, that show that the Conservatives could effectively be wiped out, not to the state of, say, the Liberals in Canada back whenever they got hit and ended up with only 2 parliamentarians. It won't be that bad, but they are looking, due to, if you take that polling seriously, they're looking at possibly having under 100 MPs, which is 326 is your majority, so they're way off being able to remotely get a sniff at a majority. But it depends, it's a long time, even though it's not a long time until July, it's a long time in terms of politics and what can happen. But I think it's going to be a real challenge for the Conservatives to have a significant swing back into their favour. It will close up. Like the huge gap between Labour and Conservative is kind of what you would expect, but given where we've been and what's happened over the last few years, and we had COVID and we had all sorts of first of all expensive scandals, but then through that you had COVID scandals and Boris Johnson and parties, even though there's lockdown and all that kind of stuff, that has led to a lot of resentment from the electorate, and that's partly why there's this big gap in between the two parties in terms of opinion polling. But it will close up, and you will get a lot of people, the old shy Tory vote, that kind of thing, where people say in opinion polls, oh no, I won't vote Conservatives, but when they get to the polling booths, then things can change. So I expect it to be somewhat closer, but I don't think the Conservative Party have much of a shout at any really large-scale electoral success. So it's going to be how big is the disaster for them. Would it lead to an outright Labour victory, or will it lead to more of a fracturing of the political landscape, so that lots of political parties pick up some of those Conservative votes? Labour did well in the local elections recently, but not crazy well. The Greens did well, Lib Dems did well, and then of course you've got the SNP up in Scotland and Plaid Cymru in Wales. Northern Ireland has its own sort of parties that don't really fit in with the what goes on in the rest of the in the UK. So yeah, it has been called. This is big news now for Ukraine. It won't have any tangible effect on support for Ukraine. There are some arguments about whether Labour will commit explicitly to the sort of funding that the Conservatives have put in play. They've certainly paid lip service to it. That rhetorically and positionally, Labour are behind Ukraine. Super support for Ukraine and all that. There's bipartisan support for Ukraine in the UK. The big funding changes to the defence in terms of getting up to 2.5% of GDP and more aid to Ukraine and this and that, which has been funded in certain ways by the Conservative Party. So I think there's some disagreement, or at least some vagueness, about how Labour are going to continue that, if they are going to continue some of those some of those policies and budgeting that the Conservatives have committed to. So there might be some finer details really to iron out for the Labour Party to iron out, especially going into the election, so people know where they stand in terms of defence, not generally in terms of Ukraine, but in terms of how much and how's it being funded, etc., etc. But there, I thought I'd let you know this has only just come out, so a bit of news there for you. I'll get on now. I'm going to be doing a live, probably going to do a live on elections in Ukraine in reaction to some comments I've had. So I'm going to do a piece on that probably imminently. So speak soon.